Hey guys, what's going on? I know it's been a while since I've made a video, but before we get into the big books I've been reading, I wanted to thank everyone for getting me to 3,000 subscribers. I really do appreciate it. Alright, first one we got here is On the Road by Jack Kerouac. If you're anything like me, you've heard of this book a lot, but you have no idea what it's actually about. I was imagining some grand American road trip that detailed a lot of different cultures, a lot of different landscapes, but that's not really the case. It follows the main character, his name is Sam, I think, but I was picturing it as autobiographical. I was picturing the main character as Jack Kerouac himself, a young aspiring writer who grows up in Jersey outside of New York City, born into a broken family, runs with the wrong kind of crowd, and he wants to garner a lot of life experience to fuel his writing career. He's got friends in Boulder, so that's where he goes. And it details the high-octane nightlife of the 1950s, which was interesting and not that different from today. A lot of drug use, a lot of all-night partying, specifically in these cramped jazz clubs. And I think that's where a lot of the historical significance of this book comes from. It may have been the first book to document that kind of landscape. Don't quote me on that, though. It's the birth of jazz, or what I imagine to be the birth of jazz, and Jack Kerouac writes about it in this style that's perfectly suited to jazz. It's very free form, it's very staccato, very abstract, and it was cool. Admittedly, it does get a little old after a while, which I guess is my opinion on jazz as well. But I really enjoyed that aspect of the book. Of course, they're in Boulder, Colorado, and they're partying and they're having their fun, but life catches up to him. Like I said, he runs with the wrong kind of crowd, so eventually they run from Boulder to Fresno, California, go through the same cycle of elation to escaping. They go back to Jersey City, they go back to Boulder, Colorado, they go back to Fresno, and they keep bouncing back and forth. And the structure of the book was that way. It was these rapid ups and downs where they're happy to be on the road and leaving their problems behind, and they get there and they have this huge celebration, and then they're looking for some place to sleep at 5 a.m. and they're dirty and they're hungover and they have to run again. Just up and down, up and down, up and down, which you'd think would make for an exciting story, but it did kind of get old. Kind of got predictable. But of course, I think that's the style that Jack Kerouac was going for, because that's the lifestyle these characters were living. These rapid up and downs, these big highs and lows, and they were trying to transition out of that. I don't know how old they were exactly. I was imagining mid-20s. But like Robertson Davies said, a man reaches a certain point, a person reaches a certain point where they have to make a turn or hit a brick wall. And I think these characters were struggling in making that turn. The main character you can relate to, but I learned something about writing unlikable main characters from this book, because the true tragedy is Dean, his friend, who is much more deeply engulfed in this whole lifestyle. He's got multiple families, coast to coast. He enjoys stealing cars. He hits the pipe harder. He hits the bottle harder. He parties harder. And he pays for it. His life is much more peaks and valleys than the main character. And you're hoping, of course, for him to pull out of this lifestyle, to even out, to settle down and grow some roots. If he does, if he doesn't, I'm not going to give you those spoilers. I'm excited to have this book as part of my Book Wizard spell library. And I talked about this a while ago, but one of the reasons I want a big library in my home is to have a huge collection of suggestions for anybody really, but mostly for my future family, to be kind of a spell wizard, because I want to say reading is magic, but we all know how cliche that is, even though there's truth to that. But to recommend a book to someone and to have them read it and digest it is a form of magic, as much as influence is a form of magic. And I think this book would be perfectly suited for the young person who needs to start settling down. I think everyone has this phase, you're out of high school, you're out of college, and the world is your oyster, and you want to consume as much of it as you can, and you want to travel the country, you want to travel the world, you want to see what's out there for you, and I think that's healthy, and I think that's normal, and I think it's hard to settle down if you don't know what all your options are, and it's hard to say, well, my hometown is the best place for me. You want to go out there and you want to see your options. But there is a trap there, and I think these characters here were falling into that trap of never settling, of this constant up and down, this constant back and forth that's filled with a lot of dopamine and filled with a lot of excitement, but also destined to fail. And I think suggesting that someone read this book at the right point in their life would influence them, of course, in a positive way, hopefully in a positive way. And I consider that a form of magic, kind of, and I would like to consider myself a book wizard, so that's what I'm gonna do. I thought this book was gonna give me wanderlust, which is why I was avoiding it, because I'm at a point in my life where I can't really afford wanderlust, but it didn't at all. This book is like the introvert's worst nightmare. He's constantly packed in a car with strangers, or he's packed in these gritty nightclubs with other people, out literally all night, and then knocking on some distant friend's door and hoping they have a bed for him to sleep in. I wanted out. This was not escapism for me. This was a bit of a horror story, but a great spell to add to my library. Much like the Snow Leopard by Peter Matthiessen, this is a denser spell. This is a spell that takes a little more time to conjure, and a powerful spell as well if you cast it right. The Snow Leopard is part nature travel journal, part anthropological nonfiction text, and part Zen Buddhism philosophy. It's a lot. It was a very dense book. And if you remember, at Christmas time, my wife actually bought this for me, but unbeknownst to her, I had already ordered one on eBay. So I had 2 copies, and I had my wife read it around the same time as I did, and just to get her opinion on it.
It wasn't for me.
And I can see why. Like I said, it was extremely dense, and he throws a lot of terms at you. I actually had to like lop off the top 15 to 20% of this book just so I can get through it. Like Kathmandu, Nepal, Tibet, okay, I'm with you there, but he gets super dense with it. And I'm not a nonfiction reader, so I don't really have a brain for terms and vocab like that, even though I'm sure there's a glossary. He's got footnotes. Those I glossed over too, so I kind of dumbed down this book for myself. So I'm sure I didn't get the full experience, but I wouldn't have gotten any experience at all if I tried to ingest the whole thing. It starts off with the main character, which is Peter Matthiessen himself, his autobiographical, talking about a journey he made to the Himalayas after being invited by a friend who was going there to research this goat-sheep hybrid that apparently lived on top of some remote mountain and was some missing link in some sort of anthropological chain. So you assume he's a scientist that's just on the hunt for some information, but what I really like about this book is that he drops in these very subtle hints for you to pick up on that highlight what he's really there for. Early on, in a very brief, like 1 sentence I think, he talks about his wife who passed away recently. That was obviously the reason he was there. This was a spiritual journey where he was trying to deal with that. And, you know, I have no idea how someone deals with that, so you would have to go to some astral mental plane in order to figure that one out, which is where the philosophical side of this book comes into play, which was my favorite side of this book. And again, he does it in this subtle way where he gives you these small doses of what I'm going to call Zen Buddhism. I'm not familiar with all the specifics of Eastern philosophy, but that's what I'm going to call what he's talking about here. He gives it to you in small doses that are digestible, that make sense. And I'm going to try and take that for my videos, because I know I can get in the weeds sometimes talking about this kind of stuff, but I think it's best done in small doses. And somehow this book was the one to really open my eyes to Eastern philosophy in general. I had read a lot of stuff about it, but I never thought that I really understood it. But this book made me realize that I do understand it. I have understood it for a long time. It just doesn't make any sense. And I think that's going to be true for a lot of people that were born in the Western world, in the modern internet age, because these ideas don't make sense. The concept of the present moment being everything, that everything about life is condensed within the present moment, is insane. You're always planning, you're always yearning, you're always wanting something. It's almost impossible to imagine a state where you're not, to imagine a state where the present moment is everything. But that's the state that they talk about in Eastern philosophy, the lack of want, the lack of desire. You don't really need to balance your life because your life is perfectly balanced, because there is nothing to balance. So once you realize that, you kind of feel bad about your own life, your own complicated life, that you're on the wrong path, that you have all of these physical aspects of your life that need balancing, and you need to take them away. I need to take away my car, I need to take away my camera, my YouTube channel. All these things are just complicating my life. But somehow also this book made me okay with living a complicated life, because honestly, I don't have a choice. It would be like lamenting the fact that humans never evolved to have wings. Like, what's the point? That's just, it's impossible for me to live a life like a lot of these Zen Buddhist Eastern philosophers talk about. And yeah, there's a lot of things in my life that I need to balance, but I think as long as I maintain that balance, it's okay to live a complicated life. And it's okay to further complicate your life as long as you're aware of what you're inducing into your life and how to balance that out. And I think, you know, in this modern world, there's a lot of really heavy things in a life to balance, like the internet and social media and seeing your dreams lived out by strangers and being aware of every minor global conflict that goes on in the world. Are you able to balance those things? Is it even possible? And I think that's why there's been a rise in mental illness. There's been a rise in drug dependency, because that's what happens when you get unbalanced, and something that's unbalanced tends to become further unbalanced. So I see what they're talking about in the Zen Buddhist philosophy, and I see what Peter Matthiessen is talking about. It would be nice to live a life that doesn't need to be balanced because you're guaranteed to remain balanced. But that's not an option. I'm done thinking that I'm ever going to achieve nirvana. So I live a complicated life, but I try and keep it to a point where I know how to balance it and it remains balanced. Easier said than done for sure, but somehow this book made me okay with my life. And I can't say why, really. It might just be the right book at the right time, but I'm going to take my own advice here, and I'm going to nip off this philosophical rambling. The book itself was really dense, like I said. I gotta admit, it was a chore to get through some points. I liked his writing style. I liked how he described the mountains. I could definitely picture myself there. A lot of the times, just like on the road, I didn't want to be there. It was in freezing weather with the wind whipping at his tent and maybe not enough food, and maybe the pass was going to be uncrossable where he was going to get after 2 days journey, which is part of a travel journal, and I did enjoy it. But Never Cry Wolf by Farley Mowat, I would recommend 10 times before I recommend The Snow Leopard by Peter Matthiessen. So if you haven't read Never Cry Wolf and you want a travel journal, pick up that one. I've recommended it before. And from a spell wizard perspective, who would I recommend this book to? I don't know. I don't know if I've met that person yet. Someone dabbling with this Eastern philosophy, but clearly doesn't really have the full concept of it, maybe, which was myself, I guess. Oh, and there's this quote from this book. Apparently it's an Einstein quote. He says something, I'm paraphrasing here, like, "Answers derived through logic alone are never grounded in reality." And that's so beautiful. And that encapsulated something I've tried to say on this channel probably dozens of times effortlessly. And if Einstein said it, then, you know, it's got to be true. Or it adds a certain level of severity to it. All right, and lastly, we have White Noise by Don DeLillo. This is a book all about death and all about how people respond to death. And I have to say, in one of my last videos, the one where I was talking about seasons and a book to read for every season, I was talking about fall and how we should use that time to think about death and to ponder our own mortality, because it's something that you need to keep in mind, but you don't want to think about all the time. And I gotta say, that was really naive of me to say. I'm kind of embarrassed about it, but death doesn't work like that. It's not possible to do that. So, you know, unfortunately, it creeps into your life whenever it wants to, and it's crept into my life. So I don't really want to enter White Noise again by Don DeLillo. I thought it was a fine book. It's about a town, and there's a train crash on the outskirts of town. Two chemicals combine creates this, what do they call it, this toxic airborne event. And Don DeLillo uses this as like a tangible representation of death it floats around the city and he shows you how different people react to it, all in weird, irrational ways. It's nothing I haven't heard from Philip K. Dick. It's nothing I haven't heard from Kurt Vonnegut. And unfortunately, I kept comparing this guy to Kurt Vonnegut. And Vonnegut does it a billion times better. Okay, maybe 100 times better. Vonnegut just has a more human bedside manner. He knows what he's talking about, and he knows it's harsh, and he knows it's sharp, and he knows when to pad it. He knows when he's really giving it to you and to say, but, you know, we're all human and we're all living through this same thing and you're not alone. Whereas Don DeLillo just kind of throws this this pine cone at you and you got to catch it with your bare hands and it hurts and you're like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. I can't say there was much uniqueness in this book that wasn't in something like Cat's Cradle. And Cat's Cradle, I think, is a much better book. I know is a much better book and a much shorter book. I didn't really like this guy's writing style. I thought a lot of his sentences went on too far. I saw where they should stop, and there was all these jarring points where the sentence continued, and it kind of just, you know, just not my style. I'm sure a lot of people prefer him to Vonnegut, and that's fine. They actually made a movie about this book, which I thought was really strange. Like, who would finish this book and say, that would make a perfect movie? Because it was a very strange movie I remember watching. I think it was a Netflix thing. Adam Driver was the main character, so unfortunately, after I realized that I had seen this movie about a quarter way through, Adam Driver was the main character in my head, which isn't that bad. I thought Adam Driver did a good job. But I wonder why they made that movie, and I think it's because of COVID. I think COVID actually offers this book a whole new aspect. COVID was a toxic airborne event. COVID was kind of this, it's not a tangible death, but this idea of death. It stirred it up and it made everyone look at it and it made everyone look out their windows and see death and deal with death. And there was never really an end to it. No one slayed death. Yeah, there was the vaccine, but I think we can all admit that that wasn't a slaying of COVID. So it's still kind of in the air. And I wonder how much unresolved mental turmoil is still going on because everyone had to stare death in the face. And I think if I can pull one BuzzFeed-worthy quote from this book, it would be, don't get so caught up with death that you forget to live. Cliche, I know, but if you think you're dealing with some sort of post-COVID death fixation, then maybe that helps. He did make an interesting point about guns at the end of the book, and how people's fascination with guns may be linked to death, because if you hold a gun in your hand, then you're kind of in control of death. Obviously you're not, but it gives you the illusion that you are. And if you like clean them and collect them and display them, then maybe it gives the illusion of that control, which makes sense to me. All right, obviously a lot of heavy stuff there, and I need to balance out my life, so we're definitely going straight to my TBR and finding the easiest, breeziest science fiction story on there. Next video will not take as long and will not be as heavy, I promise you that. Again, thanks everyone for 3,000 subscribers. It's awesome. It's really cool to have a platform to talk about these books after I read them and to hear all your comments and responses to some of my philosophical ramblings. As always, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.